Let me be the first to say that this video is meant to be almost instantly dated. It's a time capsule of sorts, to this point in the first half of 2022, mostly for me and for anyone who cares to listen. And my intent is to record and explain why Jurassic World Dominion is the most excited I have ever been for a movie, and quite possibly ever will be. And maybe in the process explain why you should be excited too. So let me tell you a story. Back in the summer of 2001, I went with my dad and uncle to see Jurassic Park 3 in theaters. I was one of those kids who ended up being a Spinosaurus fan after that one scene. Even though my thoughts on the movie changed over the years, both liking it less and more over time, I remember leaving the theater on a high like no other. I was 6 years old at the time, so I was jumping on benches, running around like a velociraptor, and even asked my dad and uncle to draw their favorite moments from the movie when we got home. Mine was when the Spinosaurus, my new favorite dinosaur, broke through the fence. But later that day, I asked my uncle, when is the fourth movie coming out? And he told me, probably sometime around 2004, and he guessed it would be titled A New Beginning, Jurassic Park, for no reason in particular. And well, we all know what happened next, don't we? Well, fast forward about 10 years, I'm in high school, and by then, Christopher Nolan had become my favorite director. I had gotten into his work after seeing Inception, and I was incredibly excited for The Dark Knight Rises. That movie holds a special place in my heart, and though some people's feelings are mixed on the subject, it's one of my absolute favorites ever. Now, by this point, Batman had become my favorite superhero, Hans Zimmer my favorite musician, The Dark Knight my favorite interpretation of that universe, and, well, as mentioned before, Nolan my favorite director. Hell, even Tom Hardy was my favorite character in Inception, so there was a lot of favorites going on there. A perfect storm. And this movie was positioned at the very end of a very long list of movies coming out that summer. Hunger Games, Spider-Man, the world debut, The Avengers, and so on. What a time to be alive, huh? And every time one of those came out, I'd go see it with my sister, and each one felt like a stepping stone to Dark Knight Rises. Everything that summer was pointing to that movie, and when it finally came out, such a big, astounding, emotional finale, made by such a meticulously talented and careful team, I was not disappointed. Now, how is this relevant? Well, it seems I wasn't the only one that felt that way. There was a little featurette they put on YouTube, and in it, Hans Zimmer talks about how, when he was still starting out, way before he was a big name, he had in his head this mysterious unmade movie, something made with the very best of the very best. And one day, many years later, he realized Dark Knight Rises was that movie he dreamed of working on all his life.
When I was a kid growing up in Germany, I had this dream of becoming a film composer, but you can't ever say that. You know, you're like in nowhere Germany. And if you say the word Hollywood, everybody, all the other kids are either going to beat you up or laugh at you, right? But in this dream, there was this unmade movie, and I didn't know what the movie was. And halfway through this one, I suddenly realized I was working on the movie that I always hoped I was working on. And I was working with the team and with the director and the sound crew that I imagined was the best you could possibly ever have in life. You know, and I actually said to Chris, so now the problem is, what do I have to look forward to?
It was a great little moment, probably my favorite in the little mini documentary. And as a 16-year-old aspiring filmmaker, it was beautiful, honestly. I was working on my own stuff at the time, and those words really spoke to me. The idea of this unmade, ethereal thing taking shape, a dream coming true in the very best possible way. That whole idea was just inspirational to me. It was beautiful. And then, my thoughts turned to Jurassic Park once again. I'd mostly given up on the idea of the fourth movie. Maybe it would get made, maybe not. But I dreamt of someday having that experience that Hans Zimmer talks about with the Jurassic Park movie. Someday to have the series back with that level of quality, attention to detail, and love put into it. but it was a long shot. The series had spun into schlocky B-movie territory since I was a kid. Rumors of proposed scripts, like that god-awful thing with the humanoid dinosaur monsters, and that thing with the gun arm. Geez, these were bad. If I thought the third movie was bad by now, this was an insult to the third movie. The whole thing had been stuck in development hell for most of my life up until that point. There wasn't much of a point on dwelling on it, but geez, some of those things, yeah. And then, they announced the fourth movie, about a year later. A director was also announced with it, Colin Trevorrow.
Smile, though your heart is aching.
Not only did they announce it, and the director, but it was coming out in like a year, in June of 2014. I took a couple days off from my personal projects at the time to work on this image. The day had finally come, and I needed to get my feelings out there. Sometime later, the movie was pushed back about a year, and now we know why. Apparently the script was, well, it was basically unacceptable. Terrible, to say the least. See, Colin Trevorrow refused to direct it as it was, and thank God for it too. The original script was like the skeleton of the actual JP4 we got. However, it was filled with a lot of that low-effort B-movie garbage that the rejected scripts had. Dinosaurs on parachutes, a made-up super dinosaur literally called the bad guy-osaurus when you translated the name. Shocking when you consider that it was written by the folks who did the 2010's Planet of the Apes movies. Those movies worked great, but those are like semi-civilized apes. It's a completely different thing to the Jurassic movies, which were intended as a way to bring dinosaurs into the modern age as close to reality as possible. I mean, the villain was literally called the Malusaurus. Get it? Malu, as in malo, Spanish for bad or bad guy. And it was supposed to be a bigger and badder dinosaur that was discovered as a fossil and recreated for Jurassic Park. Yes, this was a fake, made-up dinosaur that was supposed to be a real historical dinosaur within the fiction of the movie. Did they learn nothing from the backlash to the Spinosaurus in Jurassic Park 3? They actually had to take it a step further than last time and make up their own super dinosaur? But anyway, this brings me to my next point. Colin Trevorrow. This dude is one of my personal heroes, and he has my respect. One of my minor goals in life is to shake that man's hand someday. You see, back around the early 2010s, there was this trend of hiring relatively unknown indie directors fresh off some success with a personal project straight onto big budget IP tentpole movies. You had Gareth Edwards with Godzilla, Mark Webb with Amazing Spider-Man, Josh Trank with the Fantastic Four reboot, and Colin Trevorrow with Jurassic World. Now, to be completely honest, I'd never heard of Colin before. I figured he'd just be the studio equivalent of a hired gun, a straightforward executor of the studio's vision, who may or may not have a personal voice of his own thrown in there. Now, while this was the movie I'd been waiting for almost literally my entire life, I wasn't going in with blind optimism either. The third movie soured over time, and nostalgic comeback movies underperforming was far from a rare occurrence. You had Superman Returns, Prometheus, basically everything after Terminator 2. And while it hadn't happened at the time, Star Wars under Disney. My God, Star Wars under Disney. Studios making sequels without a plan. Sometimes even with a clear vision behind it, but it just doesn't land. You know, such is the way of the movie world. Why should this be any different? But, hey, would you know it? They proved me wrong. Jurassic World was amazing. I loved it. It was freaking incredible. This man, Colin, and his crew, they took the script they were given and just completely reworked it into something way better than it originally was. Mainly the Malusaurus. This was now the Indominus Rex, a hybrid dinosaur and literal parody of the notion of making a bigger and badder monster just to sell. I don't know how they got that past the executives, but they did. And the whole militarized raptor thing was now much more grounded, thank God, being akin to trained dolphins or police dogs, things of that nature. And surprise, surprise, it doesn't work. The raptors turn against them. So the entire concept is one that the movie is firmly in opposition to. So all in all, this movie was a very faithful love letter to the past. And when a friend of mine went to see the movie with his family, he very fittingly messaged me that same night, and he said that the final shot of the movie, the T-Rex reclaiming her home, rising to the top of the helipad and looking over the park one final time before roaring, boldly declared, Jurassic Park lives. And you know what? I shed many a tear that night in the theater, and I couldn't agree more. And remember, I had made peace with the idea of this being the last movie. All I ever wanted was one more adventure in the Jurassic Park universe, and I finally got it. And then, out of nowhere, the box office results came in, and the movie smashed records somehow. $500 million in one weekend. It ended up being the highest grossing movie of all time up until that point. Well, third highest grossing movie. Avatar and Titanic were still ahead of it, but those movies are kind of cheating because Titanic was in theaters for like 2 years and Avatar had that whole re-release thing going on. So like anybody who ends up in third place is the real winner, you know what I mean? But anyway, even Marvel Studios gave them a little tribute for beating the Avengers. That I did not see coming, not in a million years. And it was beautiful to watch that week. So, after that, they announced the second movie. And I was honestly worried and skeptical. After that ending, where do you even go from there? The excuses to go back to these islands would just keep getting dumber and dumber if they kept making them, so I had a fair amount of skepticism. But the first picture came out, and it was this child in a museum staring at a fossil collection, and this to me was promising. I felt like this had the spirit of Jurassic Park in it. It reminded me of myself at that age, just standing in museums, looking at the models and skeletons of these things, wondering, imagining. It was just pure imagination. It's what the series is all about. And so I decided to be cautiously optimistic for that movie once again. I realize Fallen Kingdom gets a bad rap, but I really couldn't disagree more. In fact, a lot of the reviews I've seen often make odd points that I think can be objectively disproven. Like the nostalgia critic mentioning the movie offers nothing new, despite the fact that it's most blatantly different of the entire series up until that point. But look, this isn't a debate. I'm not here to convince you to like the movie. Just know that for the purposes of this story, I think that Fallen Kingdom is an unexpectedly beautiful movie with an even more amazing ending. You see, whereas the point of the previous movie was to be a shining, triumphant return home, a joyous celebration of what we all loved about these movies, the point of this movie was something else entirely. The point was to learn to leave it all behind. To move on and say goodbye when the time comes. It's why I feel Malcolm appears only at the very beginning and at the very end. He has no character arc in this one. He's here to be the voice of the story, to remind us that after all was said and done, he was right and that change was inevitable. But maybe that change wouldn't have to be bad. And, much like the Dark Knight trilogy comparison I made earlier, this movie ends much like the second one in that trilogy does, with a montage that serves as both a definitive ending to this story, as well as an open gateway to the future. And now, it's brought us here. Jurassic World Dominion, the final movie in the series, is set to release in just days. And as was the case for the previous two movies, the start of the hype cycle for this movie had me cautiously optimistic. At first I was worried we were going for like a Planet of the Apes route, but thankfully, as before, my concerns were alleviated. Colin Trevorrow had, by this point, proven himself to be functioning as the entire franchise's de facto showrunner, showing his face in several filmed and written interviews for both the movies as well as spin-off materials such as, Camp Cretaceous TV show, or video games like Jurassic World Evolution and its sequel, things of that nature. And this made it clear that there was a competent team with actual passion running this ship. And much like the image of the child in the museum before, this one interview gave me assurance that they hadn't lost sight of the point of the series. But before I show you it, remember what I said about Fallen Kingdom's ending? and how my concern was that we would end up going in an apocalyptic Planet of the Apes type route, with dinosaurs ending civilization or something like that. I was firmly against the idea. It just felt wrong to me. This isn't a kaiju movie, you know? As much as I love those, James Earl Jones and Spielberg really said it best all those years ago.
Steven Spielberg wished to show us not movie monsters, but the animals themselves as they might have been. Immense and beautiful living beings that were once lords of the earth.
My interest is making a good movie that honors the existence of dinosaurs, even juxtaposed with man today, which is a little bit out of kilter with actuality. But if the movie is honorable and can, get people to say, gee, this is the first time I've really seen a dinosaur. This isn't Gorgo, this isn't Godzilla. This is really a movie that I think is really happening as I'm watching it.
Action!
Ah, yes. Pure poetry right there. And now comes the part where I show you the interview. You see, shortly after Fallen Kingdom's release, Colin Trevorrow came along and said this. I just have no idea what would motivate dinosaurs to terrorize the city. They can't organize. Right now we've got lethal predators in wild areas surrounding cities all over the world. They don't go pack hunting for humans in urban areas. The world I get excited about is the one where it's possible that a dinosaur might run out in front of your car on a foggy back road, or invade your campground looking for food. A world where dinosaur interaction is unlikely but possible. The same way we watch out for bears or sharks, we hunt animals, we traffic them, we herd them, we breed them, we invade their territory and pay the price, but we don't go to war with them. If that was the case, we'd have lost that war a long time ago. Now see, the first half of that quote alleviated my fears, but the second half is what got me firmly in the excited camp. This is where I felt like I truly understood what the ending of the fifth movie was going for, and that ending of the Dark Knight comparison I made earlier felt even more blatant. You see, as a kid, I dreamt of just the world Colin described. I'd go on vacations with my family and want to imagine dinosaurs everywhere. Looking out a window and spotting one in the woods behind people's houses. Maybe walking along the beach and seeing something in the water. Driving along the road and seeing something flying in the distance. Anywhere they might show up, just like a real animal would. And suddenly the fifth movie came along and ended with narration from Dr. Malcolm, directly quoted from the original book the series came from. And his final words, setting up the very world I longed for as a kid, as well as cementing the true meaning of the series' new title. And those words were, welcome to Jurassic World. Now then, throughout this whole process, Trevorrow has, in my view, proven himself to be a class act. You see, when Fallen Kingdom was getting a lot of flack back in 2018, some people pointed it out to him on Twitter. The original tweet that he was responding to has since been deleted, but his words remain. And he had this to say. I wouldn't take Screen Rant too seriously. The website is designed to monetize the passion of fandom. Their writers generate negative clickbait because they're paid to do it. Now, I wouldn't blame the freelancers who make the content. They're just doing their job. Fake controversy and toxicity in fandom makes their parent corporation money, so of course they'll stoke that fire. They are profiting off of your passion. I love our fans. I rely on their deep understanding of the franchise, and I listen to them when we push boundaries and make bold choices. They may not agree with every choice, but they support us, because they want kids around the world to have dinosaur movies too. When Jurassic fans hold our feet to the fire, it's not out of hatred. It's because they don't want us to forget the wonder and respect for the natural world that the first movie had, and their right to do it. It's easy to point fingers at the fandom, but the anger and aggression online is being enabled by certain fan sites who don't give a shit about the fans. They feed the fire because the flames are their business model. I'd love to see more decency in the way we voice our frustrations about the franchises we love, but we also need to take the financial incentive out of stoking toxicity for clicks. It's dishonest to blame the fans while stirring the pot. Yeah, damn right. I couldn't have said it better myself. The internet can be an eye-roll-inducing place at times, especially in fandoms, and that right there, that's how it should be done. Now, keep in mind, this was around the same time that The Last Jedi was fresh out and was also getting tons of flack, and Lucasfilm and its employees, quite famously, just ended up mired in tons of ideological Twitter flame wars for that and other projects that it was putting out at the time. People just chalking up criticism to trolls and the usual suspects, a Russian bot here and there. High Republic stuff, Rian Johnson after The Last Jedi, the whole Pablo Hidalgo thing at the end of 2020 when Mandalorian came out. You know, I'd rather not... hey, wait a minute. Is that Mike? Huh. Anyway, as I was saying, it happened, but I'd rather not get into it all because it's just exhausting, as I said before, eye-roll inducing, and I'd rather keep the negativity to a minimum. But speaking of which, something related to all that, which we do need to get into, is that Dominion itself started filming around the start of 2020, just after The Rise of Skywalker came out. And here we have one of the major reasons I'm so excited for this movie. Episode 9. But not that Episode 9, no, the Episode 9 that never was. Duel of the Fates. For those of you that don't know, Duel of the Fates is the original title of Star Wars Episode 9. It was the conclusion of the Star Wars sequel trilogy, which ran from 2015 to 2019. There's so many parallels between this trilogy and the Jurassic Park sequel trilogy that we could fill a whole video with that. You know, both have a soft reboot, nostalgic starting point. Both have a controversial second chapter, directed by someone a little more artsy, so to speak. And both conclude with the return of the original director to finish the story. But it wasn't always going to be that way. No, you see, the original director for Star Wars Episode 9 was not J.J. Abrams at all. It was none other than our very own Colin Trevorrow.
You know, I believe that, you know, the Force as an idea and something that binds all of us together is something I'm most interested in, and I can't wait to explore it more.
However, he was fired by Lucasfilm in 2017 and replaced with J.J. Abrams, who famously had to scramble to get the movie out on time, starting the script over basically from scratch, trying his damnedest to salvage a logistical disaster and ending up with a cinematic one instead. See, while the Star Wars sequel movies had an impressive level of hype and goodwill toward them at first, once all was said and done, they ended up being widely regarded as one of the most egregious examples of cinematic malpractice in the history of the medium, and I can't say I disagree. Now look, I don't want to talk about these movies for too long. Just about everything there is to say has been said by other people, so let's just make this quick, and I'll just say what needs to be said for the sake of my story. And it's that the reason for the narrative failure of these movies can be boiled down to one thing: lack of a plan. These movies quite famously made their story up as they went along, allowing each director to do literally whatever they wanted with each film. This in turn allowed JJ to make an anti-prequel movie with a ton of questions and no answers, Rian Johnson to make an anti-Force Awakens movie that ignored all those questions and went off to do its own thing, and JJ to come back and disregard everything Johnson did right back. Basically a trilogy of cinematic diss tracks, where each one hated whatever the last thing was.
The lesson is that, you know, you have to plan things the best you can. There's nothing more important than knowing where you're going, and otherwise you don't know what you're setting up. You don't know what to emphasize, because if you don't know the inevitable of the story.
Somehow Palpatine returned.
But originally, when Colin was meant to direct Episode 9, he turned in a script which has since leaked, and been confirmed by Colin himself to be legitimate. Not only did the script leak, concept art did as well, and Colin has since talked about it on Twitter, so we have a pretty good idea of what the movie was going to be, and it is almost universally praised as being a far better ending than what we actually got. The story is completely different and feels like it does its best to unite the visions of Abrams and Johnson, and truly make the trilogy feel cohesive. This script, and these pieces of art right here, These make me more excited for Jurassic World Dominion than any trailer ever could. Here we have a real honest-to-God example of how this man thinks, and how he intended to bring an equally beloved series of sequel movies to a close. The ideas in this script and the imagery in the artwork are just beautiful, truly inspired stuff, full of stunning new ideas like Phantom Luke training the hero and haunting the villain, callbacks without feeling cheap, like Darth Vader versus Kylo Ren, or Leia's final message, and bringing in elements like Mortis from the Clone Wars animated series, the unification of dark and light at the end, huge deals that made the Star Wars universe as a whole feel as if it was coming to a true climax in this story, unlike the water-treading original trilogy-only time-wasting rehash that we got in Rise of Skywalker. Duel of the Fates is an amazing case of what could have been, and it makes me wonder what this same level of effort could have in store for Jurassic Park 6.
Star Wars, not just to me personally, but to the whole world, it's kind of a belief system, isn't it?
And remember, Duel of the Fates was kind of a patch job. Colin scrambling to put together something based on a foundation with no clear direction or vision for a series of films that really had no narrative reason to exist in the first place. I mean, we're talking about a series that had already ended twice, with no intention of continuing, by word of the creator himself.
There is no episode 7.
The entire thing needed to justify its own existence narratively, and it just felt illegitimate from the moment it was clear that they had no idea what they were doing.
There's possibility there may be another offshoot movie somewhere in that world.
But not episode
But not about
7.
Luke Skywalker, not about that group of people and that struggle to bring democracy back to the galaxy.
Whereas Jurassic Park, this was a series left incomplete, left hanging on a random episodic note, like a TV show canceled mid-run or something to that effect. Making the whole thing feel cohesive, like Duel of the Fates was going to, is exactly what the series needed, and that is exactly what Colin has said they've done, and what they always intended to do, since before Jurassic World even came out. I knew where I wanted it to go. I remember telling Steven, even while we were making the first movie, this is the beginning, here is the middle, and here's the end of the end. This is where we want to go. I feel like that kind of design is crucial to a franchise like this. If you really want to bring people along with you, and make sure that they stay interested, it needs to be thought through on that level. It can't be arbitrary, especially if we want to turn this into a character-based franchise with people who you lean in to follow what they're going to do.
But how much of the story arc was laid out before Jurassic World's release? For the whole trilogy?
I knew the end of it all. I knew the end point and where the story could go, and I knew who I wanted to direct the second one. That really was a very old idea, like long before I was done doing the movie.
And so, one more reason I'm so excited, the Jurassic sequels had a plan. And so, we've come to Dominion itself. As the film approached, things began to take shape. Rumors of locations, casting choices, storylines, and the like abounded, until one day, one fateful day, we finally received the news that we all wanted to hear. Sam Neill, Laura Dern, and Jeff Goldblum would all be reprising their roles as Dr. Grant, Dr. Sattler, and Dr. Malcolm from the first movie. And not just as cameos, no, but as actual honest-to-goodness major characters in the story. But don't take my word for it. Once again, we have the word of the director himself. This is the movie that I've been waiting to make from the beginning. It's the one that we have spent the past 2 movies building to. I think people may be underestimating the size and importance of Laura Dern and Sam Neill and Jeff Goldblum's characters in the movie. It is very much an ensemble, and that element and the ability to take these beloved characters from almost 30 years now and understand how they interact with each other in the context of a world that we've really never seen before and have not been able to witness until now is very exciting. I'm having the time of my life. So, not only do we have the original cast back, this is truly it. This is the story they've been waiting to tell from the beginning. The true centerpiece and climax of the story being told. The end of the Jurassic era. A thing I never thought I'd see, done the right way. And so the work began. The film started production, and we'd get little updates once in a while online. The hype train had truly begun, and the passion and excitement of the filmmakers was quite infectious, to say the least. Unlike the previous two movies, where I was hyped but a little cautious, the production itself had a lot of charm and personality to it. Little teaser updates like this cryptic image, or Sam Neill teasing his old Dr. Grant hat, were put up online. Now these little updates I can get behind. There's no spoilers, nothing too revealing, just a fun little peek behind the curtain. So this was a very pleasant time to be a Jurassic fan, just watching and waiting as the film was prepared. Of course, it wasn't all fun and games. Production was halted for a substantial time due to the 2020 pandemic breaking out during filming. And as I understand it, the entire cast and crew were holed up in a hotel for a little while there, just kind of hiding out from the world as things went crazy. Perhaps it was fitting, considering they did the same thing during production of the very first Jurassic Park, when a hurricane hit Hawaii, and they had to hole up in a hotel there for a while too. Of course, Jeff Goldblum kept everyone's spirits up. The charm of the production never ceased, even during the downtime, as he started putting up lots of stuff online, having fun during the quarantine, particularly these videos of him and Sam Neill singing.
Yeah, not that we're complaining. During the shooting of the last movie, it was during COVID and we were all, huddled up.
Just sheltering from the storm.
We got chummier and spent many hours talking and walking.
Playing music.
Playing music. We sang. You'll look up on your
music night.
On your things, you'll see a couple of snippets of us singing some old tunes. He's got a wonderful voice. You do.
Please ignore that.
Or recreating his pose from the first Jurassic Park. Little things like that really made it feel like there was a lot of love and passion on this production, and Colin's words of having the time of his life really rang true at this point. The whole thing just seemed to have an infectious amount of joy and goodwill surrounding it.
I've seen this before. Huh? I've seen this.
Where have you seen this? Don't you recognize any of what I'm doing?
But then something else happened. There was a moment, sometime later in the summer. Do you remember what I said about Hans Zimmer's moment, scoring The Dark Knight Rises, and how I had hoped for a moment like that with Jurassic Park someday? Well, it was exciting enough that the original cast was back. This made it clear that the mission statement of making this a finale worthy of the legacy of the series was being held tight to. But then, someone else was announced to be in the movie. It was announced that Campbell Scott had been cast as none other than Lewis Dodgson. For anyone who's unfamiliar, Dodgson is the primary villain of the original book versions of Jurassic Park and The Lost World. He represents Biosyn, the main rival company to InGen. He's kind of like Frank Fontaine from BioShock, a shady, morally flexible con man who finds himself vying for power in the genetics business through corporate espionage, cutting corners, and stealing others' work anywhere he can. He looks like an unassuming businessman on the outside, but on the inside, he carries himself more like a mob boss from the Bronx, someone who'd probably be more at home in the criminal legal world of Breaking Bad and Better Call Saul than a genetics lab. And in the Jurassic world of scientists, philosophers, and animal rights activists, here comes a guy who seems to really like to take advantage of loopholes in the law, disregard anyone he has to take out to get his way, and just generally seems to know his way around a grift. And yet, he always manages to be what the evidence isn't.
He's the most dangerous type of hoodlum, the kind with vision.
However, in the movies, he doesn't really appear at all, except for this one scene at the beginning of the first one. Sure, the scene is pretty iconic, but that's really mostly because of Nedry's laugh and the memes around it. Anyway, the plot thread of Biosyn wanting to steal the embryos was forever dropped after the first movie. In fact, after Nedry dies, there's really no resolution to it at all, in this or any movie afterwards. In fact, Biosyn isn't even named in the movie. All you know is that some guy named Dodgson who represents a company, hire Dennis to do the job.
18 minutes and your company catches up on 10 years of research.
So, not only was this final movie bringing back the whole original cast to cross over with the new, it would be closing the book quite fittingly by rounding off those 6 movies in the way we began, with the original plot thread that was never resolved in the first place. And so, just as Hans Zimmer once dreamt of an unmade movie, one where he'd work with the very best of the very best, and that movie turned out to be The Dark Knight Rises, I too dreamt of one day having a moment where Jurassic Park would inspire that same confidence and hype, that same level of sheer anticipation from a team of passionate, talented creatives firing on all cylinders the same way The Dark Knight Rises did at the time. And one day, almost 10 years later, with that single announcement, I looked back and realized I was waiting on that movie. My dream had come true. Here we had a team of creatives working with complete sincerity, tons of passion, a healthy way of communicating with their audience, and most importantly of all, a clear vision and plan. And if the parallels weren't enough, we even got a prologue to the film, released in IMAX, attached to another movie well ahead of its release schedule, just as Nolan did with The Dark Knight Rises all those years ago. And, in a wholly original twist, even an example of what could have been, with another story serving as the director's greatest calling card for this project yet. Lord knows he's been improving his craft since the first movie. It seems like he learned a lot from working with Bayona on the second one. If his camera work on the short film Battle at Big Rock and the Cretaceous prologue to the film are any indication, I can't wait to see what we get in this movie. And that's what this all comes down to at the end of the day. This feels like a true completion, a culmination of years of work. As Colin said, a celebration of everything this franchise has been up until now. An adventure 65 million years in the making. Something like Avengers Endgame or Spider-Man No Way Home, where the sincerity and heart of the production really sells you on the merits of it. And at least for me, given I was barely forming memories at the time I saw the original Jurassic Park, and am now finally getting the proper true continuation I always wanted, and quite possibly the definitive ending I didn't know I wanted, you could say that, speaking from an art appreciation perspective, on the film fan side of things, my entire life has been building up to this moment. And it is for this reason that I believe that no movie ever has or ever will capture my pre-release imagination and hype as much as Jurassic World Dominion has. Nothing will ever have this perfect storm of context surrounding it. And in case Colin or any of the filmmakers responsible ever watch this, that, I think, is a truth worth preserving for them. Now, by the time you watch this, odds are I've seen the movie. Who knows how it'll turn out? Maybe it'll be bad, and I won't like it. I hope not, but the last 2 times, I was very cautiously optimistic, and they blew me away. So this time, I'm just enjoying the ride, letting myself be hyped for once. And if you haven't seen the movie yet, maybe now you will be too. And if you have, maybe you'll see the journey of this trilogy in a different light. You know, that's the thing about being a film fan growing up that way. It's like being into magic. Once you see behind the curtain, it's never quite the same, is it? But it's up to you whether that's a good thing or a bad thing. And in this case for me, I think it's looking like a good thing. So when all is said and done, I believe we can learn this from the Jurassic Park film series. With enough passion, discipline, and genuine respect for your craft, even something dead and buried can be brought back. And sometimes, even against all odds, life will find a way.
at this moment, there is a lot of conflict in the world, and I think that this is something that binds us together.